The Tragedy of a Third Smoker, a, a story from the Metropolitan Railway by Cutcliffe Hyne. I abominate detective stories, said the QC, laying down his cue along the corner of the billiard table and going across to the shelf where the cigar boxes stood. You see, when a man makes a detective story to write down on paper, he begins at the butt end and works backwards. He notes his points and manufactures his clues to suit him. So it's all bound to work out all right. In real life, it's very difficult. He chose a Partaga, looking at it through his glasses thoughtfully. And I ought to know, I've been studying the criminal mind for half my working life. But, said O'Malley, a defending counts on a different class of animal from the common detective. Oh, is he? Said the QC. And that's all you know about it. He dragged one of the big cigars up to the deep chimney corner and settled himself in. After many luxurious shruggings, then he spoke again, between the whiffs of his Partaga. Now, I'll just state you a case, and you'll see for yourself how sometimes you have to ravel things out. The solicitor who put on the brief in his hands was, as solicitors go, a smart chap. He had to build up a big business of nothing, but criminal work was slightly out of his line. He had only taken He made an uncommonly poor show of it. I never had such a thin brief given to me in my life. The prisoner was to be tried on capital charge, and if murder had really been committed, it was one of the most cold-blooded nature. Hanging would follow conviction as surely as night comes on the heels of day, and a client who gets the noose given him always damages his counsel's reputation, whether that counsel deserves it or not. As my brief put it, the case fined down to this. 2 men got into an empty third-class smoking compartment at Addison Road. One of them, Guide, was a drain constructor. The other, Walker, was a foreman of Guide's company. The train took them past the Shepherd's Bush and Grove Road Hammersmith stations without anything being reported. But at Shaftesbury Road, Walker was found on the floor, stone dead, with a wound in the skull, and on the seat of the carriage was a small miner's pickaxe, with one of its points smeared with blood. It was proved that Guide had been seen to leave the Shaftesbury station. He was disheveled and agitated at the time, but this made the ticket collector notice him, especially among a crowd of outgoing passengers. After it was found out where he was, inquiries were made at his home. His wife stated that she had not seen him since Monday, the morning of Walker's death. She also let out that Walker had been causing some annoyance of late, but she did not know what. Subsequently, on the Friday 4 days later, the Guide was arrested in West India Dock. He was trying to obtain employ as a coal trimmer on an Australian steamer, obviously to escape from the country. On being charged, he surrendered quietly, remarking that he supposed it was all up with him. That was the gist of my case, and the solicitor suggested that I should just enter a plea of insanity. Now, when I'd conned the evidence over, additional evidence to what I'd been told you, but all tending to the same end, I came to the conclusion that Guide was as sane as any of us are, and as a defense, insanity wouldn't have a leg to stand upon. The fellow, I said, had much better enter a plea of guilty and let me pile up a long list of extenuating circumstances. A jury will always listen to those, and feeling grateful for being excused a long and wearisome trial, recommend to mercy out of sheer gratitude. I wrote a note to this effect. On its receipt, a solicitor came to see me. By the way, it was Barnes, a man of his own year at Cambridge. "My dear Grayson," said he, "I'm not altogether a fool. I know as well as you that Guide would have the best chance if he pleaded guilty. But the difficult part is that he flatly refuses to do any such thing. He says he knows no killer of this fellow Walker than you and I did. I pointed out to him that the man couldn't very conveniently have slain himself, as the wound was well over the top of his head, and had obviously been the result of a most terrific blow. As a PM, it was shown that Walker's skull was abnormally thickness, and the force required to drive through it, even a heavy, sharp-pointed instrument like a pickaxe, must have been something tremendous. I tell you, Grayson, I impressed upon the fellow that the case was black as ink against him, and that he'd only irritate the judge by holding out, but I couldn't move him. He held doggedly onto his tale, and he had not killed Andrew Walker. He is not the first man who stuck it to an unlikely lie like that, I remarked. The curious part of it is, said Barnes, I'm convinced that the man believes himself to be telling the absolute truth. He's not the... That is what explanation he has to offer. None worth listening to. He owns that he and Walker had a fierce quarrel over money matters, which culminated in a personal struggle. He knows that he had one blow in the head which dazed him, and fancies that he must have had a second which reduced him to unconsciousness. When next he knew he was happening, he saw Walker lying on the floor, stone dead, though he was still warm and supple. On the floor was a pickaxe, with one of its pointy, slimy in blood. How it came to be he couldn't tell. He picked it up and held it for a second. Then in an instant he thought flashed across him how terribly black things looked against him. He saw absolutely no chance of disproving them, and with the usual impulse of crude minds, resolved at once to quit the country. With that idea he got out of the Shaftesbury Road station, and being an ignorant man and without money, made his way down to the Ratcliffe Highway, St. George's Highway. Using that as a centre, he smelt about the docks at Limestone and Millwall, trying to find a job in the stokehold, but as that neighbourhood is one of the best watched spots on earth, it is not a matter for surprise that he was very soon captured. That's about all I can tell you. I'm afraid it doesn't lighten matters up very much. I never said it would. The gist is down to your brief, Grayson. I only came round for Chambers because of your letter. Still, I persisted, you threw out a hint that Guide had offered some explanation. Oh, yes, but such was flimsy and improbable theory that no sane man could entertain for a minute. In fact, he knew it to be absurd himself. After pressing him again and again to suggest how Walker could have been killed, with the view of extorting a confession, he said, in his slow, very heavy way, "Why, I suppose Mr. Barnes, someone else could have done it. Don't you think as a man he could have got his carriage whilst I was lying there stupid and hit Walker with a pick and got out again before I come to? What would that do, sir?" I didn't think, added Barnes dryly, that it was worth following that theory any deeper. What do you say? I thought for a minute and then spoke up. Look here, Barnes, in the face of this cock and bull story, Guide persists in his innocence. There may be something in it after all, and if by any 1,000-to-1 chance we could bring him clear, it would be a red feather in the caps for both of us. Do you object to my seeing the man personally? It's a bit irregular, said Barnes doubtfully. I know it is, but dang the teeth of etiquette. But suppose we compromise, and you come with me. No, I won't do that. My time's busy just now, and besides, I don't want to run up the costs of this case any higher than necessary. But if you choose to shove your other work aside and waste a couple of hours, just go and interview him by yourself, and we'll waive ceremony. I'll get the necessary prison order and send it around to you tomorrow. Next afternoon, I went down to see Guide in the waiting room of the Old Bailey. He was a middle-aged man, heavy-faced, and evidently not half stupid by the situation in which he found himself. He was perhaps as great a fool as to his own interests as one might often be to meet with. There was no getting the simplest tale out of him except the regular question-and-answer cross-examination. What little did he tell seemed rather to confirm his guilt than otherwise, though, strange to say, I was beginning to believe him when he kept on assuring me between every other sentence that he did not commit the murder. Perhaps it was the stolid earnestness of the fellow in denying the crime which convinced me. One only gets to be real good in facial expression when a man has watched what goes on in a criminal dock as long as you and I have done. And can usually spot guilt under any mask. But tell me, I said, what did the quarrel have to do in the first instance? Money, said Guide smoothly. Well, that's vague. Tell me more. Did he owe you money? No, it was the other way around. Wages in arrear? No, it was money he had advanced on me for working on my business. You see, Walker had always been a hard man, and he'd saved. He said he wanted his money back, and knowing that I couldn't be pinched a bit, then he couldn't pay. Then he tried to thrust himself into partnership with me in the business, which is the thing I didn't want. I'd good contracts on hand, which I expected would be in the matter of the £9,000, and I didn't want to share it with any man, least of all him. I told him so, and that's how the trouble began, but it was him that hit me first. Still, you returned the blow. Guide passed the hand warily over his forehead. I may have struck him back, sir. I was dazed, and I don't rightly remember. But before God, I'll swear that I never lifted that pick to Andrew Walker. It was his pick. But, as I persisted, Walker couldn't have conveniently have murdered himself. No, sir, no, he couldn't. I thought of that myself since I had been there, and I said to Mr. Barnes that perhaps somebody came into the carriage while it was knocked silly and killed him. But Mr. Barnes said that would be absurd. Besides, who could have done it? Don't you know anybody, then, who would have wished for Walker's death? There was them that didn't like him, said Guide daringly. That was all I could get out of him, and I went away from my prison feeling very unsatisfied. I was stronger than ever in the belief that Guide was in no degree guilty, and yet, for the life of me, I did not see how to prove his innocence. He had not been a man of any strong character to begin with, and the shock of what he had gone through had utterly dazed him. It was hopeless to expect any reasonable explanation from him. He had resigned himself to puzzlement. If he had gone melancholy mad before he came up to the trial, I would have not been one with wit surprised. I brooded over the matter for a couple of days, putting all the tests of my patience to think it out, and I didn't get any forewonder of it. I hate to give anything up as a bad job, and in this case I felt there was on my shoulder a huge load of responsibility. Guide, I had thoroughly persuaded myself, had not murdered Andrew Walker. As sure as the case went into court, and on its present grounding, the man would be hanged out of hand. And I persuaded myself that I alone should be responsible for an innocent man's death. At the end of those 2 days, only one course seemed open to me. It was foreign to the brief I held, and the only method left to bring my client's innocence. I must find out who did it and really murdered the man. I must try to implicate some third actor in the tragedy. To begin with, there was a railway carriage, but little thought showed me that there was nothing to be done there. The compartment would have been inspected by the police, and then swept and cleaned and garnished with couple on its train once more. To use an unconscious passenger for weeks since the uproar occurred to it. All that I had to go on were the notes and relics held at Scotland Yard. The police authorities were very good. Of course, they were keen enough to bring off the prosecution with a professional jet. But they were not exactly anxious to hand over a poor wretch to the hangsman if he is not thoroughly deserving a chance of nonsense. They placed at my disposal every scrap of their evidence, and said that they thought the reading of it all was plain beyond dispute. I thought so too at first. They sent me the inspector to my chambers as their envoy. On one point, though, after a lot of thought, I did not quite agree with them. I held a grisly relic in my hand, gazing at it fixedly. It was a portion of Walker's skull, a disc of dry bone that had splintered aperture from the middle. "And you say that the pickaxe made the hole," I said to the inspector. "I don't think there can be any doubt of it, Mr. Grayson. Nothing else could have done it, and at the point the prick was smeared with blood. But would there be room to swing such a weapon in a third-class metropolitan railway carriage?" "We thought of that, and at first it seemed imposing. The roof was low, and both Guide and Walker were tall men, but if Guide had gripped the shaft at the end, so his right hand pressed pretty near the head, he'd have had heaps of room to drive it in a sideways swing. I tried to think for myself. It acted perfectly. Here's the pickaxe. You can see for yourself." I did see it, and I wasn't satisfied. But I couldn't tell the inspector what I thought. It was clear to me that ever the man Guide had not committed the murder. What I asked the inspector was this: had either of the men got any luggage in the compartment? The inspector answered, with a laugh, "Not quite, Mr. Grayson, and you would see it here." Then I took the paper and wrote There's an accurate sketch of the exact size of the gash on it, and the inspector went away. One thing his visit has shown me: Andrew Walker was not slain by a blow from behind by the pickaxe. I met Barnes whilst I was nibbling lunch and told him this. He heard me doubtfully. "You may be right," said he, "but I'm not bothered if it might you go upon." "You know what a pickaxe is like?" I said. "Certainly. A cross-section of bone, and one of the blades would do that." "Square, or perhaps oblong." "Quite so. Rectangular. What I want to get at is this: it didn't even be the diamond shape, with these angles obtuse and acute accurately." "Oh, certainly not. Angles would be clean right angles." "Very good. Now look at the sketch of the hole in the skull, and tell me what you see." Barnes put on his glasses and gazed attentively for a minute or so, and then looked up. The pick point was crashed through without leaving any marks of the edges whatsoever. "That is to say that none of your right angles are showing." "None, but that doesn't go to prove anything." "No, it's only about a tenth of my proof. It gives a vague initial idea. It made me look more carefully, and I saw this." I poked with my pencil to the corner of the sketch. Barnes whistled. "Clean arc of a circle," he said, "cut in the bone as though a knife had done it. You saw the pickaxe. Wasn't much worn. Were the angles much rounded near the point?" "They were not. On the contrary, the pick, though an old one, had just been through a blacksmith's shop to be resharpened, and had not been used since. There was not a trace of wear upon it, and that I am certain." Barnes whistled again in such a perplexity. At length he said, "It's an absolutely certain thing that Walker was not killed in the way they imagine, but I don't think this will get Guide off scot-free. There's too much other circumstantial evidence against him. Of course, you'll do your best, but it would be more than a toss-up if I could avoid a conviction. Quite so. We must find out more. The question is, how was this wound made? Was there a third man to it? Guide may have jobbed him from behind with some other object, and afterwards thrown it out the window." "Oh, yes," said I, "but that is going on the assumption that Guide did the trick. which I don't for a moment think is the case. Besides, if he did throw anything out the window, it would have assuredly been found. They keep the permanent way very thoroughly inspected upon the Metropolitan. No, Barnes, there is some other agent in this case, animate or inanimate, which so far we have overlooked completely, and an innocent man's life depends upon our raveling it out. Barnes lifted his shoulders helplessly and took another sandwich. I don't see what we can do. Nor I, very clearly. But we must start from the commencements and go over the ground inch by inch. So wrapped up was I in the case by this time that I could not fix my mind on anything else. Then and there I went out and set about my inquiries. With some trouble I found the compartment in which the tragedy had taken place, but learned nothing new from it. The station and the railway people in Addison Road, Kensington, were similarly drawn blank. The ticket inspector at Shaftesbury Road, who distinctly remembered Guide's passage, at first seemed inclined to tell me nothing new, till I dragged it out of him by a particular emmerich of questioning. Then he did remember that Guide had been carrying in his head a carpenter's straw bass, as he passed through the wicket. He did not recollect whether he had mentioned it in the police, and he didn't see that it mattered. I thought differently, with a new vague hope in my heart, and posted back to the prison. I had heard no word from the hand baggage from Guide, and it remained to be seen what he had done with it. They remembered me from the previous visit, and let me in to see the prisoner without much demur. Guide owned up to the basket once. Yes, he said, I had some odd tools in a care from home, and as I couldn't see anything else handy to put them in, I used an old carpenter's bass. I had an iron eye to splice on the end to the windlass rope, a job that I like to do myself, to make sure it's done safe. I never before about telling you about bass before, sir. I didn't see how it mattered. Where's the bass now? Left in the left luggage office at Shaftesbury Road Station. Name of Hopkins. I've lost the ticket. Where did you put your basket on entering the carriage at Addison Road? Well, in the seat, sir, in the corner window. And with that, I left him. Now, I thought, I believe I can find out whether you murdered Walker or not, and drove back to Hammersmith. I inquired at the cloakroom. Yes, the carpenter's bass was there, beneath the dusty heap of other unclaimed luggage. There was demurrage to pay it, which I offered promptly to hand over, but as they could produce no counterfoil bearing the name of Hopkins, the clerk, with a smile, said that he could not let me have it. However, when he heard what I wanted, he made no objection to me having an overhaul. The two lugs in the bass were threaded together with a hammer. I took it away and opened up the sides. Within it was a ball of marline, another spurn yarn, a grease pot, and several large iron eyes. Also a large marline spike. It was the last that fixed my attention. It was brand new, with a bone handle and a bright brass ferrule. Most of the iron was also bright, but 3 inches down the point were stained with a faint brown. From the casual inspection, I should have put it down as the marline spoke having been last used to place a spike on a tapered rope. But now my suspicions made me think of something else. I raised the stained point to my nose, and there was no smell of tar whatsoever. On the bright parts, there was an undeniable odor of iron. At the tip, that thin coat of dark brown varnish blotted this agent completely away. I think my fingers trembled when I turned over the bass again. Yes, there on the opposite point of the marline spike had been lying, was tilted up over a ball of spun yarn, with a closed-up gash on the side of the bass. The spike had passed through there, and had been withdrawn. Around the gash was a dim discoloration, which I knew to be dried human blood. In my mind's eye, I saw the whole ghastly accident clearly enough now. The two men had been staying up and struggling, and Guide had gone under below, knocked senseless, and Walker stumbled over him. Pitching forward, face downwards on the seat before he could recover, his head had dashed violently against the carpenter's bass. The sharp marline spike, with its heel resting against the solid wall of the carriage, had entered the top of his skull like a bayonet. No human hand had been raised to kill him, and yet he had been killed. I kept my own particular ramblings in this case remarkably quiet, in court up to my facts, though ordinary cross-examination. At the proper psychological moment, I called the attention to the shape of the puncture in Walker's skull, and then dramatically sprang the bass and the marline spike upon them unawares. After that, as the papers put it, there was applause in the court, which was instantly suppressed. "Oh, the conceit of the man," said O'Malley, laughing. Grayson laughed too. "Well," he said, "I was younger then, and I suppose I was a trifle conceited. The Crown didn't throw up, but the jury chuckled as not guilty without leaving the box, and then leading counsel from the other side came across and congratulated me on having saved Guide from the gallows. Now I'd have a bet anything on hanging that man," he said.